Can you sing a little tune of that song?
Olvidarte de un amor que no se va a acabar, estar con todo el mundo, na 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 na.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 57 of the Iga and Carlos Tennis Show. And as you can see here, this is a bit of a special episode that we're doing here on the Alcaraz documentary that just premiered on Netflix a couple of months ago. And we have a special guest here with us. As usual, we have our usual co-host, Damian. Hello, Damian.
Hi, yeah, I can't believe I'm doing this. I mean, nobody forced me to watch Breakpoint, and I just watched one episode because a friend of ours, a mutual friend of ours, was watching it when I was at his house, and I was kind of like, why not? Then I never actually got to see the whole thing, and I thought it was going to be the same case with the Alcaraz documentary, but Vansh made me do it, and I'm glad to also have a special guest today that will definitely help us kind of like get into it.
Yes, indeed. And this special guest is Owen Lewis. He is the founder of Popcorn Tennis, and he occasionally writes for the Defector as well. So he's a great writer, and you can find some of his work there. But Owen, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Really big fan of this podcast, and excited to talk about this documentary. How are you guys?
Yeah, we're doing well. Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. And while we're talking about the documentary, I guess kind of more big picture. I mean, this is about his 2024 season, but more than just the results on court, which we've obviously chronicled a whole lot on this podcast. It's more about his journey and his mental approach, his team, the more about him as a person. And so, from that sense, it's kind of hard for tennis documentaries in general to just nail the tennis aspect of it, like show points and highlights from matches and shots, and it's more about getting to know the human behind it all, and like the team and the mental side of the game. So I think this was more focused on that, which I guess is somewhat similar to Breakpoint, but I found this one a lot more compelling.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely still in that sort of vein where, you only see some clips, the match point usually, the set point sometimes, but it's fine. If I want to relieve some of the matches, then I would probably just sort of go to watch some highlights. I'm fine with that, absolutely. But it requires the human part of it to be compelling. There's obviously a lot of guests around. There's a lot of people showing up from Carlos's family, from Carlos's team. Some of them, are characters that I wasn't really familiar with, like I don't know, like the agent, for example. Albert, was it? I mean, I really started liking that guy. I'm gonna look for him in the box now. And I don't know. I felt a good vibe from him, let's say. And yeah, over this last week, I was talking to a few people about this documentary as well in Estoril, and they didn't watch it. But basically, I was trying to either like bring up a point from that, or basically trying to tell them what it is about. And to me, first and foremost, it's simply about like balance, right? So in order for Carlos to like still have fun playing, but there are a lot of things you need to do as a tennis player, and you are kind of just forced to have these obligations. You basically have to play, well, not maybe every week, but let's say there are these mandatory tournaments that you have to compete in. And of course, if you want to like keep yourself up at a high level, at a high ranking, you basically need to do it. So I guess to me, it's just the whole thing is really about that. So like for the tennis to still be fun and not be an obligation, but at the same time, it kind of can't be fun and it has to be an obligation.
Yeah, it's a great point, because he actually says that quote directly, right? He says, my fear is that tennis will become an obligation for me. So, yeah.
Yeah, and more than that, I think multiple people in the third episode, if I'm remembering right, say that if you want to achieve what Rafa has achieved, you have to be a slave, which I think is probably an exaggeration, but that puts it very bluntly. And I agree with you guys that the balance is sort of like the main theme of this series. That said, I do want to take some shots at Netflix for their portrayal of the actual points. Like I agree with you guys that it makes sense to prioritize the storytelling, but at the same time, it's like Netflix, we see what you're doing, where you like take commentary from one point and then put it over another point. Or I don't know if you guys caught this, but the championship point of the Wimbledon final last year, Djokovic nets a second serve return off his backhand. But in the Netflix series, they show like a super cut of like both guys hitting shots, and then Alcaraz hitting a forehand winner down the line, and then they just cut to his celebration, and I'm like, that's not how it happened. So I definitely took some issue with that, but I I was very impressed at the amount of access they got and how honest the characters were. Like, well, I'm sure we'll get into it, but there were some quotes that were pretty striking and like almost a little too honest. Like I could imagine Carlos watching this and be like, "Damn, like that's tell me how you really feel."
So maybe to that point, what do you think like drove Carlos to agree to something like this? Like I'm not sure how much, was his idea, how much it was Netflix, probably kind of 50-50 or something like that in terms of how the actual show in the end looks. But yeah, I mean, why would someone allow this sort of access? I think recently we had a Daniel Medvedev in Madrid talking about something like that, and basically that for him it was just really irritating when the guys were just like everywhere with the cameras, and that his wife and his child also needed to be involved in this, and that for him it was kind of just like, no, that's way too much. There's a certain like amount of personal space that I'm not willing to share with the world, which as you are right to point out, I mean, in this documentary I don't think we really have that much left to unseen really.
Yeah, I mean, I think Carlos also was in Breakpoint as well, so he had definitely agreed to give like kind of a more behind the scenes access to him and his fans, and he's just a bit more open and honest and vulnerable in general. So I guess some of that is just his personality, and I don't think he has to like fake it a whole lot in front of the camera. But then also we see him getting really honest and really in it with I mean really in this kind of a battle with him and Ferrero psychologically, where it's kind of interesting, like almost um it starts out by him obviously saying that I want to be the greatest tennis player of all time, but then every single person in his team kind of echoes that sentiment as well, and you hear that same line over and over and over and over, and I kind of wonder, he's like sort of inviting all this pressure on himself throughout the course of his career, and he seems like okay with it. He seems like, all right, let's bring this on. He feels comfortable putting it out in the open, which I thought is interesting because I don't even think the big three are like that. They're way more guarded in that sense.
Yeah, I agree. Although I do want to push back on one thing you said there a little bit, where so yeah, he does, like you said, we hear that line, "I want to be the greatest," over and over and over. But then I think episode 2 is called "I'm Not Rafa," and
Mm.
he talks about how it sucks to kind of constantly be measured against Nadal. He wants to be his own person, and I completely understand that. But then I think he also says, like these guys, like the big three, like they're aliens, and like it's so hard to achieve what they've achieved. And I'm kind of like, well, you do kind of invite the comparisons yourself by saying that like you want to be the greatest, you want to sit at that table. And I of course, like we all contradict ourselves, and he is a 21-year-old, but I think something that jumped out at me while watching this was like he seems like a 21-year-old. Like at times he almost seems like a bit of a mess. Like there's this very clear split in his team. Like they think he should be working harder and taking breaks less, and he's like, but I have to be happy. And he talked a lot about, I don't want to see tennis as an obligation, but he would even go as far as to say like, because if that happens, I might like quit, or like I might quit in like 3 years or something like that. And so it was almost refreshing from a sense of like it's nice to watch like a tennis star who seems like a real person. But yeah, from in the perspective of like the goals he wants to achieve, I don't know if it necessarily inspired optimism there. It seems like he's having a bit of a tough time sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the slave thing earlier. I actually kind of think you have to be a slave to, to do this. Like Rafa, like Novak. Novak is also brought up as this example that basically his whole life is, he's breathing in order to be a better tennis player, which is kind of what it is, right? I mean, he has that sort of like a diet and routine. And Carlos, I think, even in this documentary, I think at some point he says like he's just willing to commit to a point where I'm not, at least for the time being, right? And yeah, I do think you can see that he is a 21-year-old. He's also a 21-year-old who I think a lot of tennis players, I mean, they kind of grow up and they don't really have that much else to do. Like they don't have many ideas as to like even how to spend their free time. And for him, it's clearly not like that, right? I mean, he has many other ideas for what he could do if he wasn't playing tennis. But obviously, tennis is just something that covers so much of your day. So in a way, yeah, he's just not willing to make the sort of sacrifices that Rafa or Novak are willing to make. And yeah, I mean, the whole greatest player in history part, that was also something that I had a lot of thoughts about. Because if you think about it, like how many players on tour actually want to be the greatest player in history. I think there are a lot of players on tour who think, okay, so I would like to be number one, or maybe even I would like to be the greatest player of my generation. But to sort of come up and want to be the greatest player in history, I don't think that's like anyone really. We have the best players on the women's tour right now. Let's say Świątek Sabalenka. There's no chance they're thinking of like going after Serena's records. Yannick Sinner, is he thinking about being the greatest player in history? I highly doubt it. I mean, he might at some point. Let's say Roger Federer when he was chasing the Pete Sampras record. I don't think, first of all, it was this publicized. I don't think that, the social media, of course, landscape was very different. So I don't think it was such a big deal at the time that he is chasing the record, even if it was a story and you have all these images of Pete sitting in the crowd, obviously, when he's winning the Wimbledon 2009 title. But I don't think we ever really see that on tour where somebody just like comes up and says, okay, I want to be the greatest player in history, even though right now he has 5% of the achievements. And it's certainly a lot of pressure. I think most players just kind of arrive, if they have that sort of a possibility, they arrive at a level of thinking like that when they are already, let's say, halfway.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, he is kind of the first in that way to invite that on himself in such a public way. But I guess, you guys both brought up Djokovic and Nadal and having to be a slave. I like that they also included Federer in terms of contrast, and also like that first meeting between them, that interaction between them at Laver Cup. I thought that was really cool. And I think Federer is probably more understanding of Carlos's approach than most people in the documentary, because he certainly is known. The reason I bring up Federer is also the way Carlos plays, right? He plays kind of on instinct. He plays very creatively. He's kind of the same qualities that the commentators use to describe Alcaraz's shot making. A lot of that is very Federer-esque in terms of his approach, right? So I kind of wonder that if that's something that his team kind of has to figure out on the fly as they're going, that old school kind of draconian mindset of like being a slave to tennis, if that actually applies to someone like Carlos, because he's such a unique kind of genius in his way, and he's very like artistic with how he plays.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that like it doesn't apply to him, because like for all his coaches are saying like, oh, he needs to not go to Ibiza and he needs to not like take breaks and all of that. Like he is on pace to do this, and like like you said, Damian, he's maybe like 5% of the way there, or like 15% of the way there in terms of major titles. But he's doing like so far he is like doing the thing. Like he has 4 major titles at now 22 years old, and it was interesting throughout the documentary how like when he would take breaks, it seemed like then his tennis would be better. Like I hadn't known that when he
right? It was
it's like that's the whole thing.
He takes a break and then he goes on and wins. It's funny.
Yeah, like, I hadn't even known about the when he got to Indian Wells last year, he was like in a funk, and so he played golf, and then like he was better, and then he wins the tournament. And I mean, yeah, like you do get the sense going forward that like you do have to be like pretty single-mindedly dedicated to this. And I thought it was interesting how I think even Carlos was like, can I achieve these records while still having fun? Like, probably not, but we'll see. Like it doesn't really seem like anyone thinks that he's actually going to be able to do this the way he wants. And so, yeah, I'm curious if that's going to manifest in his personality warping a little bit, or people on his team leaving, like as they allude to, like Ferrero, like is actually saying like, I don't know how much longer I can do this. I don't know. It kind of seems like eventually there's going to be an inflection point where he either needs to like change his ways a little bit or give up his goal.
Yeah, and a lot of this stuff, like we've known about this before, right? The Ibiza trips, I mean, they were definitely public, but they just weren't maybe acknowledged to this point. I think on the show last year around the US Open, we were definitely talking about with Vansh about like how Carlos kind of needs to have fun on the court in order to prevail. Because when you were watching that match against Botic van der Zandschulp or something like that, like you just don't see the passion, you don't see the intensity, the hunger, and yeah, then the match is gone. Then it's actually impossible to produce a comeback like from zero to down. So I think a lot of this has been said before, or at least implied, and we were already talking about it. But to kind of see it packaged like this, and especially the fact that a lot of the members of the team are like, no, Carlos, I mean, you can't go to Ibiza right now. Or Ferrero says pretty explicitly as well that in Queens last year, that like Carlos just wasn't ready because he just didn't have enough time on the grass. He didn't have enough reps. and that it was impossible for him to win that week. But at the same time, you look at it at like face value. Both times he went to Ibiza, very different Queens results, and then both times he wins Wimbledon. So I mean, what are we complaining about in a way? Of course, this is also something he's going to be finding. During his career, he has to kind of like understand himself, what makes him tick, and what basically will help him, and what is necessary, what is not. But obviously, as he said, I mean, for now he is like on track to get to these goals that he is mentioning. So in a way, I mean, yeah, if he wants to go to Ibiza, just let the guy go.
Yeah, because in with how grueling the tennis calendar is, and with how much the majors are already a priority for him, like it's already a biggest priority in terms of like, he's already reached a point at 21 where it's like we're talking about the majors as like the defining reason for success, like not the other 1000s or the other big tournaments, because he's already kind of reached that status. So for him, if the goal is about like peaking and trying to win as many of those, to try to get to that number that he clearly has in his mind, then I guess at some point you do kind of have to, look out for yourself, like take those breaks to just come back a bit more refreshed. Like how many times, for example, did Federer like not play anything after winning Wimbledon until like Cincinnati, or he kind of used that time to like refresh. And I guess like it wasn't, I guess you have to find the right balance, right, between like training and then like practicing and then like taking a vacation and like doing the things that you want to do. But it's almost like, maybe like his team doesn't quite fully understand him to that, because like they show his parents, for example, and I think like his mom and his dad are like very much probably on his side when it comes to this stuff, or they at least kind of understand what he's like and like what makes him tick a little bit more. But obviously the people that you pay, it's very different, right? The people that you pay to be your coach. This goes back to
Andrea
what
Petkovic, yeah.
we were talking about in the previous episode with Andrea Petkovic. And yeah, maybe she was thinking about both Iga and Carlos when she made those comments.
Yeah, I mean, it is really interesting, and I will say on like the whole commitment thing, I do think Alcaraz is kind of screwed to an extent in terms of like the age, because like right now when people are like, oh, he's not as dedicated as Djokovic, I'm like, look, if Djokovic and Alcaraz were the same age, maybe we're looking at like Djokovic has 1 major title, Alcaraz has 4, and we're saying like, oh, Novak needs to take more breaks and have more fun, and then maybe he'd be as good as Carlos. Like, I don't know if Alcaraz at this age can be expected to like have this like single-minded, almost like religious dedication that Djokovic has, and I honestly don't know if he can be expected to be as tactically aware either, just because it's like there is no way to simulate like 15 years of professional experience and goal building and all of that. And yeah, speaking of Alcaraz's parents, I thought his mom made a comment that was something like, I don't want my son to become like a worn out toy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really it. Like if he goes too hard and he burns out, like he might not get that energy back. And so I think it's a very, very long road ahead. And so I think he's probably thinking about pacing himself as much as anything else.
And that's very important because like the I think they even say it. I don't remember who, maybe Ferrero, but basically that a career like this, like Novak, like Rafa, like Roger, I mean, it's not built in 5 seasons. You basically need to be there for like 10, 15, and you need to be winning. I think somebody says it. I wish I rewatched it because somebody says it as well. I think that if you win like 2 slams a year, then you're on track. And if you didn't win 2 slams in that season, the next time you need to win 3 of them or something like
That's
that.
Ferrero, yeah.
I think it's Ferrero, yeah. And he acknowledges himself that this is, a very brutal standard. But if we're talking about greatest player in history, that's what you kind of have to aim for. And yeah, this will not be built in. And I think someone says probably Ferrero, maybe the same even utterance there. But basically, someone says that you can't do it in 5 years. That's actually Rafa, I think. I think it's Rafa who says that you basically can't win 20 slams in 5 years. And he's wrong because you can. But actually, of course, I know what he's heading for. It's basically impossible. And yeah, a career like this is all about pacing yourself. Because if you just play for 5-7 years, there's absolutely no way to get to these ridiculous numbers and the longevity standards that the Big Three has set for us.
Yeah. So I think now I want to kind of shift the discussion over to more like the sides of his personality that we saw that were maybe new or maybe different from what we were expecting. Because obviously they show many different sides of him. They show like kind of the the cocky but not arrogant side, which I find personally the most favorite. But also, we see like the warmth that he has, like kind of like how popular he is amongst his players. Kind of when the big three are kind of talking about him, or the just like what a positive presence he is kind of to be around, and he is kind of unique, I think, in that regard of being able to have a lot of fun while playing and showcasing that joy and that interaction with the crowd. And I hope that that's something he never loses as he continues to get older and inevitably does become a little bit more of an obligation, which or at least a bit more like the older you get, you do lose some of that youthful exuberance and energy. So I am very curious to see how he kind of manages that side of it as well going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think a good sign that he might be able to maintain it for a while is that I think early on in his career he didn't have a whole lot of like tough losses. Like everyone knows his 5-set record. He hasn't lost one of those since Berrettini at the 2022 Australian Open. But the Cincinnati final to Djokovic and now the Olympic final to Djokovic, like those are losses that stay with you, especially the Olympic one. Like you don't get a chance to write that for 4 years. And I think the fact that he's kind of maintained his exuberance like through losses like those, even though like they did affect him and you could see that, I think is a good sign. But yeah, I mean, to do it for 20 more years is a tough ask. And I think like with the taking breaks thing, like I had not realized that before his loss to Draper in Queens in 2024, he had basically been like staying up all night partying for a week, or at least that was how the documentary framed it. Like his there are a couple talking heads that are like, you can't perform at your best when you've been like partying all week. And I did not know that like that was the extent of it. I think at the time I chalked that loss up to like, oh, he's fatigue from Roland Garros or something like that. And it seems like fatigue might have been a problem, but not because of Roland Garros. So yeah, I mean, if he needs to do that, then he needs to do that. But yeah, like you said about the sides of his personality, Vanch, it kind of seems like it is like juggling a lot of things and just trying to use like the right side of his personality at the right time, and sometimes he doesn't quite get the balance right.
Yeah, the partying was also like pretty heavily underlined. I think it's kind of rare for somebody at this level of professional sports to come out and say, I was out drinking. That's all there is. I mean, I can't really imagine any other top players doing that. Obviously, drinking is a part of the sport. I mean, we've all heard the Nick Kyrgios Acapulco anecdotes, but it's Nick Kyrgios. It's not Carlos Alcaraz. It's not someone who Nick Poor slams. But sure, I mean, it makes sense. And indeed, juggling different things, I think, is a good description of the general like gist of this documentary. Because again, it's just all about that sort of balance and wanting to do stuff, but then actually needing to do some different things, and basically how to manage all of that. I think in many ways also like the way he can release this pressure, what Vansh mentioned about like the locker room and the peers of Alcaraz. I think in this way also you can kind of say he might be a little Federer-esque. Roger was obviously always like cracking jokes in the locker room and basically was I don't know, friends with the other guys in the locker room, but basically always just like hi to everybody and always making them laugh, and I don't know, just doing something to like not make this super competitive atmosphere out there. I think for Carlos that's kind of also the key. Maybe when it does get a little bit too much of that, that's when the Djokovic issues come in. That's when he clearly still has that one matchup that he fears in his mind. But yeah, maybe especially now that his English is also improved, it's going to be for him a little easier to do something similar, just kind of make his existence on tour a little lighter with a joke or with golf like he did in Indian Wells.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I also like the kind of behind the scenes with him and Albert Molina. I mean, you touched on Albert Molina, but yeah, I came out of that documentary feeling like, wow, he's like one of my favorite characters now, and I'm always gonna look out for him when they do show him on TV. But like he's such an important presence in his team. Like I hadn't quite clocked it, before this documentary, how important he actually is, because obviously he's very well aware of the superstardom of Carlos and kind of how famous he got very, very quickly, and how he sort of needs to pace himself, manage all of that. And it's a tough job for an agent to handle all of that. And I feel like it was cool to kind of get the behind the scenes. Like, for example, when he was about to pull out from Madrid, right? There's that scene where he's like, make sure you mention this, make sure you talk about how you've been trying really hard, and it just like I I know that that's what agents are supposed to do, but it was cool to actually see that in action.
It's interesting hearing you guys talk about Molina, because I think I had a bit of a different perspective on him than you guys did. Like, he has this really heartfelt quote in the last episode where it's something like, here, I can pull it up, but the gist of it is something like, if Carlos achieves everything he wants to, and then he tells me, like, I'm not happy. Here we go. So Molina says, I care so much about Carlos that I'd rather fail professionally than have him turn around one day and say, damn, I wasn't happy. I achieved all this, Albert, but I wasn't happy. And then Albert says, that would destroy me. And, I think that's very heartfelt, shows that his heart is in the right place. But I mean, most of his scenes in the series are him like trying to have Carlos like fulfill his obligations and like not take breaks. Like he didn't want him to go to Ibiza. There's a bit where Carlos has a promo with the MMA fighter Ilya Taporia, and Molina has a talking head where he says, like, Carlos has all these obligations, and we try to like make them fun for him, so he like pays, so he enjoys them more. And I'm like, that makes sense, but it's almost like he's talking about Carlos as if he's 10 years old. Like, oh, we need to like wave something shiny at him, so he pays attention. And then there was when he didn't show up for the I think he didn't get to a hotel lobby on time or something. And Albert was like, Carlos, like you let yourself down. Like this is and he's like really, really like giving him the business. And Carlos is almost like a little sheepish because he's like, I think he's like more regretful about how disappointed Molina is in him than, missing this obligation by a few minutes.
I think his point more though was that he made other people wait, right?
Yes, that was it. Yeah. And like not that he was wrong exactly, but it's sort of like is that what your agent should tell you or what like your father should tell you? I don't know. I just felt like Molina at the end, he did say he wanted Carlos to be happy, but I felt like most of his appearances in the series were him being like, no, Carlos, like don't go have fun, like go to this obligation instead.
I think that's kind of his job, though. I mean, that's the voice of reason, and again, this kind of because of the Petkovic thing recently, it right now it kind of leads me to a lot of questions regarding, because obviously Carlos pays his salary, and then how do you still be blunt with him? So I guess it's good that he's able to do it, but yeah, I suppose it works like that, and it's not only Molina; it's a few people that basically exist in order to make Carlos happy and create the best possible setting for him to blossom both as a person and as a tennis player. And in many cases, I'm sure it involves a lot of like tiptoeing around him. And in the end, it's still his call. He's gonna do it his manera. But I suppose, yeah, that there are people who have to exist to kind of tell him, well, actually, Carlos, well, I don't want you to do it. But in the end, of course, it is his call.
Yeah. I do wonder a little bit more about, Ferrero saying that he, that he can't put up with this any longer, or that he, feels like, Carlos has to do this in order to become the greatest player. And I don't think he's like ready for it. Like the coach saying that really publicly is also something very unique. I don't think I've ever heard a coach like of a really great player just kind of, and I guess that's what this documentary is really about. It's about being open and vulnerable and like showing that kind of difference and that kind of angle between the coach and him. But like, yeah, it just makes me kind of wonder, like, how did Ferrero get to that point where all of a sudden now his main goal is like, I really want this child prodigy to become like the greatest ever. Like, I know he's been in the Ferrero Academy since 2018, but it's only been like 6 or 7 years, and he's already so tied to this one goal.
Ferrero took a big chance right away, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he basically halved his salary so that the Alcaraz parents could pay.
He made so many sacrifices.
Yeah. I mean, he took a chance on this kid like from the very beginning, so I guess it makes sense.
But yeah, I mean, you are right, Vansh, that like, I don't know. I think one of my main takeaways from this documentary is that this partnership is not going to last until the end of Carlos's career. Like, I agree with you that like, it's one thing to kind of feel that way, but to sort of say it so publicly, like, and paraphrasing, but like, oh man, like his work ethic isn't as good as mine, and because of that, I don't know if I can like, I don't know how long I can be his coach. And that almost goes back to like what you said at the beginning, Damian, is like, why did Alcaraz want to do this, because like he's very emotionally vulnerable. I feel like he almost like revealed more weaknesses and kind of fissures in his team than he had to. And kind of the only explanation I can come up with is that, it's like to promote his brand and to kind of establish some more like global fame, because I don't know why. I don't know. It almost seems like his rivals can like capitalize on this a little bit, and like maybe tell themselves like, oh, like he's off partying right now. Like let's beat him at the tournament when he comes back. And yeah, and then I guess the other thing I thought about is that Ferrero saying like there's this like generational divide over like work ethic, and like basically everyone on his team saying that like he needs to like focus more and not take breaks, like regardless of whether their heart is in the right place or not. Like you said, Damian, they can't make him do anything. And I think the fact that like these splits seem to be so like recurring makes me think that like I don't know. It almost seems like they're trying to like turn him into a different person or a different player. Like he's never going to be that kind of like single-mindedly dedicated like player. Like he needs to if like I don't know, it's like the title says, like he wants to do it his way. And so to a point, I almost like wonder why they even bother in terms of being like, Carlos, like please do this. It's like if he needs to take a break, he needs to take a break. And so I don't know. I think Ferrero is probably gonna go coach someone else or just stop coaching him sooner or later.
Ferrero also at some point like disbanded with Zverev, right? Because Zverev was late to practices. So I guess
there you go.
that kind of makes sense with that. But yeah, no, I mean,
3 months. That partnership was so quick.
Yeah, I guess I'm looking at it a bit differently, as in like, yeah, so he's not going to be Djokovic or Nadal in terms of work ethic, professionalism, maybe later in his career, who knows? But obviously they also probably weren't quite like that at the beginning yet. But what I'm more looking at is like, if you just let him loose, if you just allow him to basically do anything he wants, that's also not something you can do. Like it's impossible to be a professional sportsman, especially this successful like that. So to me, they're kind of like the whole team and these people telling him, Carlos, don't do that, are kind of like the necessary voice of reason. And in the end, it's still his call, but they can, tell him that, well, this doesn't seem like a good idea. And sometimes he will agree with them eventually. Sometimes he will not. There was this interesting scene, which I think is like kind of the cornerstone of the whole documentary, when Carlos and Juanqui, they sit down and they kind of like agree to something, right? And there's a lot of like...
This was presumably after the US Open, right? Because, this was just before he played the Labor Cup, and he took like an extended break because he went to go see an F1 race, right? And
yes, that's right. And that was another instance where I think Molina is like, he just told me unilaterally, I'm going to Formula One, and we were like, don't go to Formula One, and it's like he's already gone or something like that. Like he just decided that he was going to do that.
And then it's like, then you see him have the success he did, like at Labor Cup, and then also winning Beijing and beating Sinner in that epic final, and then you have the conversation between those two, which is just like. Right. Juan Carlos was just like, I didn't approve of you, and I don't approve of you doing all this. But I thought that was a really kind of heart to heart between them, like really frank disagreements. But some of that was obviously probably dramatically edited, for effect. But still nonetheless, I think that was the main scene that we should probably analyze more when talking about this.
Yeah,
it's even fascinating to have something like this captured on camera, right? Like I don't think that has happened before. Like a heart-to-heart conversation like this between a player and a coach, which is changing their relationship drastically. I mean, maybe the most important part of the conversation was like off camera. I don't know, but still.
Yeah, totally. It felt like the climax of the entire series, and I think the point of agreement they come to was sort of like, well, like Carlos, you have to find like your own personal like motivation. Like we can't like supply it for you. And he's like, yeah, like I need to find the why or the how or something like that. And yeah, it did give me like some reassurance that I found some common ground there. And Damian, I obviously agree with you that like they can't just like let him run loose, because then he might be in Ibiza for a month. But at the same time, it seems like it seems like not only did Carlos not agree with them at times when they said like, don't do this, but it also seems like his team was wrong sometimes, because like I don't know, if he doesn't take that break between Roland Garros and Wimbledon in 2024, do you think he still wins Wimbledon? Like maybe he maybe he
Probably
gets
not.
burned out and loses to Tiafoe. So I don't know. Like obviously he's Alcaraz is the one who knows himself the best, and I do think like he does have to. And I wonder if I'm curious what you guys think of this, but I kind of have this theory that Alcaraz's like shot making is kind of a way of translating that need to have fun like onto his day job, if that makes sense. Because something I thought that he was struggling with in the series a bit is that realization that I've had, and I'm sure you guys have had, of like maybe you turn like 21 or 22 and you start to work and you realize like this is just going to be my entire life now until I retire in like 50 years or whatever. And it does seem like he was also struggling with that a bit of like, man, like these like tournaments, promotional appearances, and then being home only 2 weeks of the year, like that's just my life now. And so I kind of wonder if like the sensational shot making on court is like, well, let me see if I have ways to have fun like during my job and during my obligations as well.
That's a really good point, because now you just made me think of all the scenes where they show him at home, with family and in front of the big dinner table, and you get to know his brothers and you get to know his parents, and how he really enjoys being like a homeboy. Like he loves being at home because he knows he can only be at home for literally 2 weeks the whole year. And like, there was also some things on social media, some quotes where people were like, "Oh wow, he still lives with his parents," and etc. etc. And it's kind of like, at least I think those are like the people in his life that he can like rely on the most and trust, in terms of like they're gonna give him the hard truths, as well as they're gonna know exactly how he ticks. And so I almost wonder if um like him being at home more often, and like finding spots in the year to kind of like decompress from the tour, is like what he really needs moving forward. Because at some point when you get older, you also can't play 15, 20, 25 tournaments a year. Like you're gonna have to like cut down your schedule, and you're gonna have to like, for longevity reasons, not burn out. And so I almost because it's easy to forget, like he's just turned 22 years old, and it's kind of like, how does how does he process this? Because on one hand you could say like he's already ahead of where the big three were when he was at his age, but then on the other hand you're like, he really has severe ups and downs, where I was telling Owen this like kind of off mic the other day, where it was like, to be the kind of extravagant shot maker that he is, he almost needs to have a little bit of ADHD in some ways, and I think we saw some of that in the documentary.
Yeah, I think these images from his home, they tend to be the ones that I get to see like on Twitter or other social media. Like these are the ones
Yeah.
that people who didn't see the documentary, that's what they saw. And they're like, oh, so he's still living in that small bedroom and he's Wimbledon trophy.
Yeah, single bed.
And
Single bed, yeah.
yeah, exactly, single bed. And then I don't know, it definitely is something pretty wild that he's still living, multi-millionaire, multi-billionaire, probably still living with his parents. But it does seem to make a lot of sense for him, especially as we see all these like family dinners, yeah, and it's so extended, and you have so many people around, which I do think eventually, it's a very healthy distraction for him, at least looking from the video, from the documentary. And yeah, to what you said earlier, Owen, I don't even think it's a theory about the shot making. I think that's like kind of legit confirmed that his way of playing tennis is the way it is because he just wants to have fun on the court. And any other way, it would also be somewhat of an issue for him. Like he just does not care for, the percentage play, point construction. He's not the kind of guy. And it might be frustrating. It might be leading to some of the inconsistency that we've been seeing. Maybe it will lead him to also, not having as many weeks at number one as he possibly could. But if he keeps racking up the Grand Slam titles, then who cares?
Absolutely. I mean, and here's another instance where like I kind of want to almost like criticize Carlos a little bit. Like I do fully agree that he needs more time at home, probably, Vanch. But then at the same time, he is going to these like exhibitions in Saudi Arabia and the Netflix Slam when he could and should be resting. And I get that like appearance fees are a big part of that, and he made a lot of money to do those events. But yeah, you do see cases where he kind of shoots himself in the foot a little bit, I think. And another part about being 22 years old, 21 during the documentary is like he probably doesn't know exactly what he wants. I mean, I'm 23 and I don't know what I want. I'm like day to day, I'm all over the place, and it's and this kind of goes back about it being refreshing to watch someone who seems like a normal person. Like, yeah, it seems like he emotionally can be like a little bit of a mess, as like a lot of people that age are. And yeah, I don't know about like ADHD. Like I don't want to necessarily diagnose him, but the guy's on his phone a lot. Like Rafa teases him about liking Instagram photos of like models or
was funny.
influencers. He has a bad attention span. I think we can all agree on that. I mean, but at the same time, like that's what makes him so like sublimely fun to watch. Like my favorite like Alcaraz memory this year is do you guys remember the set point of his first set or the second set against Fis in Barcelona, where he like digs out this great get on his forehand in the corner, and then he kind of like he's wrong footed, but he gets to it anyway, and then Fis like hits it into his backhand corner, and Alcaraz like hits this lob, and as soon as it goes up, Fis is like, head down, like knees bent, because he knows he's been like fooled. And I was watching that point, and I was just like, man, no one else in history plays that point like that. Like, I don't know if Federer is fast enough to get back the initial forehand. Like, Nadal and Djokovic are not hitting a lob in that position; they're hitting a passing shot. Like, it's just no one else like thinks like that. And yeah, I mean, that does seem like the contradiction of Alcaraz is like the things that kind of make him vulnerable also make him so interesting and fun to watch and give him the highest peak in men's tennis right now.
Yeah, that's why you see him pull off spectacular shots, and then you don't criticize the shot selection. But then when he actually doesn't pull it off, then we're like, oh, what a bad shot choice. And it's like, dude, you wouldn't be saying that if you actually made the pass.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, maybe like one of the very few full points that's shown in this documentary is like Damian, I remember you calling this live during a YouTube stream. It was during the Alcaraz Sinner Roland Garros semi, and Sinner hits this like return off of a body serve backhand down the line right into the corner, and then he approaches the net off this cross court forehand that like hits the sideline, and Alcaraz from the bleachers basically hits his forehand pass down the line, and it's like, yeah, Sinner just hit two perfect shots and lost the point. And yeah, I mean, that is Alcaraz at his best. And can he do that without being like a bit of a like not very focused, like fun loving individual? Probably not.
Yeah, now I wasn't sure at first, but now obviously I know which shot you're talking about. Very similar to that Jarry one in Rio de Janeiro as well. Yeah, I think on the show we were talking about this a lot. That like, yeah, Carlos is fun to watch for the same reasons that he is maybe not the most efficient player. I also like how Owen is just like casually dropping opinions that are going to get some fire in the comments, I hope, about Carlos having the highest peak in men's tennis right now. Debatable.
But yeah, like, who else do you think? Like, do you think there's an argument for Sinner? I mean, he's beaten him the last 3 times they played.
My personal opinion is probably Alcaraz. I mean, he has all the intangibles, really. Whereas Yannick probably is like the more, shot by shot, better player. But yeah, I mean, obviously I'm kind of kidding. Although, yeah, I can see this being a controversial topic. But yeah, attention span you mentioned, and kind of like being on his phone a lot. I mean, that's just the generation he comes from, right? Obviously, Rafa is not going to be on his phone as much as Carlos is. And we all struggle with our attention spans. I mean, I basically cannot do one thing at a time anymore. And that's also, he's even 4 years younger than me, so I totally get that, and maybe that's also what makes him relatable to fans. And you mentioned the exhibitions as well. Yeah, I mean, I have nothing to say about the Saudi Arabia thing. I think it also is after, it is after Beijing, right? So the documentary doesn't really cover it. But with Netflix, I mean, at least in the video, at least in the show, it is explained that he really wanted to do this because of Rafa, because Rafa might not be around forever and he wanted to spend some time with him. Now, is it more important than the money? Who am I to know? But the way that the show presents it, it's more painted as a want to spend some time with Rafa thing. There's some good moments as well there with Andre showing up, right, and telling him kind of how he can learn the most out of the little time that he will get to spend with Rafa, which I also thought was really interesting and a nice perspective from, of course, another former great. So at least that exhibition is kind of accounted for, let's say.
Yeah. By the way, that scene with him and Rafa in the Spanish team playing that board game. Oh my gosh, how competitive they both got. That was funny.
I totally get that, because I was even using this particular game as an example to my friends some time ago, that like, this is possibly the most random, luckiest game ever. And I was just telling somebody, I'm this competitive that if we played that, I would be just like killing myself over winning or not losing. And I guess these guys are doing it too. So I found that very relatable for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think Molina even had a quote where he was like, watching these guys play Parcheesi, it's like they're fighting for a Grand Slam title. And when I saw that, I was like, okay, man, like you don't need to. We see that they're competitive. You don't need to go that far. But yeah, like obviously they are extremely competitive, and the Rafa thing was interesting to me too. And another thing I got from this documentary was that I didn't realize that they took the doubles loss in the Olympics that hard. I kind of thought like, oh, nice farewell tour for Rafa. Like I didn't realize that they were like that intent on winning gold, and that it actually seemed to take like an emotional toll on both of them, and especially Carlos when they didn't. And I especially hadn't thought about that in relation to him losing to Djokovic in the gold medal match. Like I'm not saying like if he goes farther with Rafa, like you're gonna pay a physical tax for that, but I don't know. It kind of made me wonder like that first Olympics. It's a lot to deal with like emotionally, and so I think like retrospectively, I've started to think of that match with Djokovic. Initially I was like, man, he really should have won that. I think he really let that go, and I think now I kind of think like it actually would have been really, really hard for him to win that match, and I don't blame him so much for it anymore.
Yeah. Interesting, because the doubles, like you would think like just kind of as an outsider, like, oh yeah, Rafa's last Olympics, he's already won doubles. It would be nice for him to win it again with Carlos, but I guess for Carlos it probably meant so much more. Like, to do this with his idol and with his countrymen, and it just added those extra layers to it. That's why, now that I think about it, I mean, Nadal was such a big part of Alcaraz's 2024 that it just, I kind of overlooked that a little bit, actually. So glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and he was part of his retirement party, of course, later on at the Davis Cup. But yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I think we always, obviously the topic of singles Olympics disappointment for Carlos, that's been covered so much already, and how that actually hampered him for, the remainder of, not the remainder, but for the North American hardcourt swing, maybe even for later matches with Novak. But the doubles is never really mentioned, and I guess I wasn't paying it that much attention either. Maybe it's someone says it, I think it's Albert actually, who says that like, okay, so because these guys are playing together, everybody's just expecting them to win gold. And I just never felt like that around the Olympics, So to me, to hear that sentence, maybe it wasn't like that shocking, because I understand a lot of the casual viewers, especially, they were just thinking, oh, so it's two amazing singles players, they're surely going to win. But to me, it was always like, yeah, they're in the mix. Undeniably, the Olympic doubles event tends to be, because obviously players can't pair up with guys from other countries, so it tends to be a little weaker, let's say, than most tour events. Sure, they are one of the contenders, but they just never looked at it like that, they're just a guarantee to win gold. I mean, after all, we saw how inexperienced Carlos was in doubles at the time, and still is. So that sentence, I mean, I guess to me, and now also what you said, kind of made me realize that, in a way, we're just not remembering the doubles loss, but it probably contributes to the whole thing as well.
Yeah, and another thing about Rafa that I'm curious for you guys' thoughts on was that, and it's possible that I'm reading too much into the scenes, but I know they're joking around and they're playing doubles together, but it did not seem to me that Nadal is going out of his way to really be a friend or a mentor to Carlos. Like, I think Carlos said a couple times, like, more than any advice from him, I just want to be able to like have a drink with him as friends, or like be his friend. And it didn't really seem like they were at that stage yet. I don't know. It almost seemed like Nadal was still, even though he was like about to end his career, was almost still treating him like a rival. Like, not that he was unfriendly or anything like that, but like both being from Spain, like both having these grand ambitions, you would almost expect Nadal to be like pretty close with him almost, I feel like, or like even living vicariously a little bit through Carlos. And I didn't really get that sense. I got the sense that Carlos like really wanted to be friendly with him, but wasn't quite sure how to approach it.
That's interesting, yeah, because I think Nadal wasn't quite sure about his actual final retirement plans until actually the match with Djokovic happened. I think by that point, and a few weeks later, that's when he kind of was like, all right, I think it's time to end this career somehow, some way. But back then, I think he still had a small part of him still believing that, like, I better not help this guy too much, because what if I still have a few more months left in me, kind of a thing.
Right.
I mean, interesting point for sure. I feel like we don't get to see that much of their interaction, like to kind of know how it was, but it would make sense, just like with overall, Rafa's character. I think Novak would be kind of the same. So yeah, again, in that like very disciplined, work ethic type of deal. Yeah, sure. I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah.
And
I was surprised the Laver Cup
oh,
was the first time that he and Federer actually met. I didn't realize that.
yeah, Federer too. I like if I were Federer, I'd be like, man, I want to come meet this guy like the soonest opportunity. But yeah, and by the way, do you guys remember that kind of brief controversy when Nadal had those quotes about like, I'm not as obsessed as
Yeah.
Djokovic about the records?
Yeah.
At the time, I was kind of like, oh, I think that's true. Like he seems to be more like chill with his life and all of that. And then seeing his talking heads in this documentary about how you have to be a slave. Now I think I was totally wrong. I think that he was totally bullshitting everyone when he said that. He was just as obsessed as anyone else.
I think the way he like kind of went out of his way to say it a few years ago, it kind of showed that it hurt him. Yeah, like that he basically at that moment realized that he was not gonna get Novak's records. That statistically he will never be as good as him from that point, considering all the injuries and everything that he had to go through to keep playing tennis. So I do think even the sheer fact that he said it in that interview, not necessarily unprompted, but still he went out of his way to make that whole point. And to me, even at the time, like it was pretty clear that it hurts him. I think Roger was the one who kind of like chilled out about it, in the latter stages of his career. But of course, there was also a point when he was just as obsessed. And then probably that moment of realization came when he also realized that, okay, so I'm not going to chase down. Well, of course, in a way, he was retiring when they were still pretty close, but he basically knew that he can't keep up anymore. And that's when he kind of started getting pretty chill about it. Rafa probably took a bit more time, but I think right now that's also a position that has shifted a little.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember if there are any sort of other poignant moments from Carlos or his team, but nonetheless, I mean, the way the documentary ended, right, mostly ended with that conversation, and then the Beijing title, they did kind of spend. They did something that I wish that they maybe could have done a little bit more is just like they kind of showed his rise. Obviously, the rise they had to number one was just incredibly fast, but I don't think they showed like so much. They kind of made it look like it was super easy for him to get to number one, which I don't think it was.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, like, the only highlights they show of his entire 2022 US Open run is him hitting a serve +1 against Ruud right down the middle of the court, and then, like, a few shots of forehand winners. And I'm like, okay, guys, like, it is not that hard to show the end of that scramble point where he, like, at 4-all, 30-all in the third set, where he, like, ends up on his stomach and then looks at the camera and smiles. Like, I don't know how they didn't put that in there. But yeah, it really didn't lean that heavily or show that much new stuff about his development early in his career. I feel like all that was kind of out there anyway.
Yeah, true. I mean, we maybe could have seen some. Well, but at the same time, it would have been then not their footage, right? Like if they started talking about 2019, 2020, or whatever, it wouldn't have been like their original things. They would have to find some, other.
They probably have to
stuff
find a
to use.
commentator, to just fill in those gaps for about a couple
Right.
minutes, and just be like,
Yeah, I think it makes sense for them to do it the way they did. I mean, it's definitely very focused on, first episode Roland Garros, second episode Wimbledon, and third episode, of course, Olympics and Beijing. So I guess in that sense of like structure of the show, I don't really have major issues. The more we're talking about it, I also think that at first I said that this is a show about the balance of obligation and fun in Carlos's life. I guess in a way it's also a story of, I don't know, like lost childhood, lost early adulthood because of tennis. And then yeah, I mean, I don't know if it necessarily changes anything in my outlook on it. But I'm just adding to the list of themes that I have in my head.
yeah.
I
And also
mean, I think that's true. Sorry, go ahead, Vansh.
No, I was just going to say that with Roland Garros coming up, I'm also just kind of remembering going back to the first episode, just like how bad that arm actually was, for all that time that he couldn't play. Because I think we knew these reports. Like obviously we hear stuff from like Marca and Put It to Break, and we get quotes like when he's of his practices, and there's so many crazy fans out there who just follow the guy, like and they know, and we're able to get info very quickly through social media. But I didn't quite grasp like how intense it actually was and how doubtful the French Open really was for him. Like for a second, it really seemed like, oh, he might actually not play this tournament.
I'm glad you brought that up because, like, yeah, watching Madrid, we all knew that his forehand wasn't at its best. And here's where the Netflix access is at its best. I mean, those shots of Ferrero in the box being like, "Are you kidding me? Like, that's the forehand speed we're playing with today." And like Albert, like, if he wins this with his forehand speed, like, I'll get drunk. Like, yeah, I didn't realize the extent of that either. And I think at the time I was kind of like, when he reacted after beating Sinner in the Roland Garros semifinals, I kind of wondered why he looked so emotional. And I think this like reframed that for me a little bit. Like that was a pretty unlikely win, the way his season had been going, I think.
Yeah, I mean, just as a whole, obviously last year there was this whole conversation about the French Open being so open finally after 20 years, and then these two guys just show up playing it. Yeah, these two guys just show up playing at like 80% after very suboptimal warm-up swings, Carlos included. Second round against Jesper de Jong, underrated match. He really could have lost there, and physically he looked toast. And after that, obviously, he picks himself up. But yeah, I get that at this point, the team couldn't have been like, yeah, I mean, they definitely weren't optimistic looking into the future. The whole thing changed. I think indeed it's nice that we mentioned this thing because for like 5-10 minutes, I feel like the documentary spent a lot of time on the arm injury and also kind of like the mental consequences of that. So like how sometimes Carlos would just come out and the pain was gone, and then he'd kind of feel the same. Oh, and actually there's this one thing more. They make a point of Carlos just not being able to handle pain or any physical nibbles, right? That basically whenever something like that happens, he's just completely gone. And that this also makes him a little maybe different to other players and I suppose less resilient physically. That basically whenever he has any sort of issue, little pain, he just kind of like turns off and is unable to continue with that. Where I think that's actually a pretty big part of, life as an athlete, dealing with small physical nibbles.
Yeah. True. I mean, the one qualm I also have is that in the second episode, I don't think they actually dedicated enough time to the Wimbledon win. Like, they spent more time on the US Open loss to Botic than they did of him, like, actually winning Wimbledon. I wish they'd shown a little bit, like, they could have even shown, like, 30 seconds of, like, the Tiafoe match or something, just to be like, look at how close he was.
Is the Djokovic final the only one mentioned? I guess it is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like they didn't spend enough. Like, the guy just won the Channel Double. I feel like they could have done more there. But anyway.
I agree with that. I thought another thing was like the Sinner semi at Roland Garros, I thought was the only match that they really like told the story. It's like, starts badly, wins the second set, like then cramps, and then he comes back. Like there was an actual narrative to that. And I found it kind of amusing that even though the final was like equally complicated, after he beats Sinner, then it basically is just like a smash cut to him lifting the trophy or like winning the match point against Zverev. Like, look, I have no love for Zverev. Like that was a pretty stressful match to watch, but it was like they could have just done the same thing for that. And because that match was also had a lot of momentum swings. So yeah, I thought it was kind of curious how they decided to jump through the tournaments.
Yeah, a lot of creative decisions. Obviously, they have to focus on something. I suppose, yeah, in a way, the story of especially the second episode that Vansh just mentioned, that's just the final really at Wimbledon. The story is not really the final, right? But the warm-up swing, the way that he was preparing for it or not preparing for it. So I suppose that's what they focused on rather than the actual tennis at the tournament. But I don't know, for some reason, nothing bothered me. Again, maybe it's just the flight, maybe the next flight I'm on, I could just take a break point. Maybe even breakpoint will be good on a flight because for some reason I was just really focused and I wasn't bothered by any of this stuff really. So maybe when I get this little like very very few opportunities to like switch off completely obviously forced opportunities to switch off because there's no connection, because there's no signal on the plane. Maybe that's when I just take in documentaries and basically films the best.
Yeah. I think in the moment I wasn't too disappointed by it because I mean obviously like it's not meant for me. It's like it's meant for a different type of audience. But looking back, I kind of was like I was thinking about it before we recorded this. I'm like they really didn't spend that much time on the actual Wimbledon win. But anyways, I think you're right. They spent
Isn't
more
it
time
made
on
for
the
you
match.
though? I kind of don't know if I agree. I mean, Breakpoint, sure. It was more like, I want to bring you guys to the tennis world. I want to show you the sport. But this is kind of made for you, no?
I guess it's made for diehards, but maybe diehards who like are looking for something different that they don't already get in their like like tennis, like the actual tennis points and everything. Like it's not. It's
I
maybe
mean,
not.
yeah, from that standpoint, yes. If you're like looking about analytical side of things, then no. But I mean, you do have a show that is kind of like half dedicated to Carlos Alcaraz.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of split on this. Like, I really do get hung up on like not just the lack of like tactical or analytical explanation, but just like the lack of like showing footage of points from the traditional TV angle. Like Netflix just seems to be completely opposed to ever doing that. Like, I don't think they showed a rally that was more than like 5 shots from like a static angle. And so I don't know. I don't know if I can say that it was made for diehards if it's like so allergic to just like showing the actual points of tennis.
Yeah. I mean, obviously they were going to be more focused on the storylines and the narratives, but I also they also have to get the balance right between showing enough of the tennis, and that's where I guess I'm being maybe a little critical about Wimbledon, only because it was just such a monumental thing. Like to do French Open and Wimbledon back to back, it's just something that I thought deserved a few more seconds. But oh well.
I guess like another takeaway I had from this, and you guys may disagree, but I feel like the Netflix documentary is kind of the only way that we can see like a top tennis player's emotions or real like storylines these days. Like I feel like just the difference between this and like a press conference really just underlines that like these guys are media trained to death and they're not going to tell you anything that they don't want to, like I feel like the profile is kind of dead. Like how many times does a player show up to a press conference and just like give these media trained answers and not really say anything? And there are exceptions, right? Like, Alcaraz can be funny. Like I think like Sabalenka is a great press conference character. Iga can be really thoughtful, but just in terms of most players being this open, I feel like they're only ever going to do it for like a camera crew at this point. And that has kind of like underlined my belief that a lot of these press conferences are a waste of time.
I wonder if Damian has a different take from.
I get the sense he does.
I don't know. I mean, you definitely meet a lot of politicians on tour. I can't deny that. Still, to me, like this documentary, like, did we see anything groundbreakingly different to what we already knew about the Carlos personality and even about that work/fun balance? I mean, I feel like a lot of these points that we made today or that I had while watching the documentary, we're already raising that with Vansh. Around the US Open, weren't we talking about just the lack of fun in Carlos's game basically being a complete like mood killer for him? So I don't know if it like changed anything other than giving it a nice packaging, but to me his personality was still kind of like all in the open previously. This is just a way to like kind of summarize it. So I'm not really disagreeing with you, but I think at least in the case of Carlos, probably he doesn't fit into that discussion.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably fair, but I don't know. At least speaking for me, you guys may be way better at reading between the lines than me. I did not realize like nearly the extent to which like his team and him kind of disagreed on the best like approach to his career. I was quite surprised by that. But
Yeah.
I don't know. It seems like maybe you guys had some idea of that already, or at least a better idea than me.
I think on this show we talked a lot about him finding the balance between work and fun, but not necessarily the aspect of it between him and his coach and like
Yeah,
the
that's
confrontational
yeah.
dynamic. I guess that part we never really went in super big depth on. So that this documentary definitely gave us a good like more specific perspective on that. So I thought that was helpful.
Yeah, I'd second that. Yeah, I think that we knew that this sort of contrast, this battle was going on in his mind,
Yeah.
but probably not that there are also a lot of people around who will be involved in that and will typically have, yeah, just let's say a more restrictive idea than he does.
Yeah. By the way, the scene where he's about to meet Federer, um, and then he goes like, he's a very unique character, and then he like with a cheeky grin or something, he goes, "So am I," or something. I enjoyed that part. Or at
Yeah,
the
that was
end,
good.
when Federer leaves and he's like, he has the conversation with Federer like on the court where there's like fans behind him, and he's like, "Oh, there's some magic, some of that magic is in me." I thought that was
I
funny.
mean, that's how I would react if I met Roger
Yeah,
Federer.
it was like a total Federer fanboy reaction, but I loved it.
Yeah, and I loved that "so am I" line as well, Vanch, like that. And I agree with you that kind of my favorite Carlos personality is when he's a little bit cocky because it tells you that he knows how
Yeah,
special he is. Like I like it when he plays one of these ridiculous points and then just like nods to his box. He's like, "Yeah, I know I'm pretty cool." Like that's nice to see.
yeah. So those are the kind of things that I hope he's like. It would be amazing if he maintained that and he was like 32 or something. But that would be that's that would make him that would separate himself, I think, more than any of the other records or anything. Because it goes back to the ending, where he's like, my ultimate goal is to be happy.
He's
Those are
gonna
the
grow as a tennis player. He's gonna grow as a person. To in which way, how he develops. I mean, that's obviously not really possible to tell so far. But yeah, this is also a very important quote when he says at the end that like being happy is an achievement or something like that, right?
Yeah.
That kind of feels like one of the conclusions that he himself arrives at during the recording, during the kind of like the production of the show.
Yeah,
yeah.
and this is really impossible to say either way, but I am curious on you guys' thoughts about like, do you think he is going to kind of have his way in the end? Like whether that looks like having fun and like breaking the records or like not breaking the records, but finding a way to be okay with it, or do you think he like crashes out? I don't know. I'm just curious. Like, what do you guys think is gonna be the story of his career when it's over?
I think he's going to continue to break some records. He's going to continue to win multiple slams. He's going to continue to have insane highs, but he's also going to have periods like we have been seeing the last couple of years where he might struggle for a few months and not win any titles for 6 7 months. He might go through some periods and some darker times, but I think eventually he'll come out of it feeling satisfied that he did it his way. I do think he'll have his way in the sense that he'll be able to maintain joy for the game. Now, whether he'll play as long as the big three did, I don't know, because I think there's a lot more that goes into having a long career than just working hard. But it's impossible to say whether like tennis wise he will hit those same heights. But I think he will still put himself in a league of own in certain specific records. And then as far as like the all-time slam record, I've always thought he could win more than 10, but I haven't put a number beyond that, because I just think it's so hard to predict. Like, who knows? So I've kind of said
Yeah,
at
I
least
guess
10, but I don't
maybe
know how many.
maybe like I said earlier, like he might not be the most consistent. He might not get
Yeah.
the number one weeks, that maybe some would expect him to. But as long as he keeps like winning big titles, let's say one a season, I mean that's already really good. And yeah, I'm probably more of a realist and just thinking kind of like Vansh, double digits. And then if you arrive there when you're 26, 27, that's when you can actually start thinking about, becoming the greatest of all time. But for now, I guess that's not really a goal that I have on my mind when it comes to
Mhm.
Carlos, just because 20 is, yeah, I mean the way that the goalposts were moved, it's pretty ridiculous. I mean, simply because it requires over a decade probably of staying at the top. which tennis-wise, talent-wise, ability-wise, obviously it's very possible for Carlos, but there are so many moving elements at play that I can't really answer that question, I suppose.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe Yannick Sinner will continue to motivate him, and maybe maybe when he sees when he sees Sinner doing really well or surpass him when sometime in the slam count, if he ever does, or something like that, maybe that like changes his whole perspective. Maybe all of a sudden now he's like, actually, Ferrero, you were right. I want to be a slave. Let's do this. That would be.
I think that was also raised as a point in this documentary, right? That the big three were kind of like pushing each other continuously and forcing each other to adapt their games. And I believe at some point that is also compared to Sinner that, I mean, suddenly there's that rival and you have to keep up. Of course, for now he has, at least in head-to-head clashes, but probably more of these await.
It's a great point. I mean, Damian, like you also mentioned the weeks at number one thing very early, and like, I think that's a great point. Like, I would even say with some confidence right now that like if he is going to achieve a bunch of records, like if he does become the GOAT, it's going to be because he wins like 26 slams and not because he gets like 500 weeks at number one. Like that feels like much less likely to me than him winning a bunch of slams, just because of the focus thing and the probably also being a little bit better on the natural surfaces than on hard court, at least from what we've seen so far. But yeah, I mean, I gotta say, I kind of think that in the middle of his career, at least for a little bit, I think he's going to burn out hard. I think the fact that they're talking about that already and he's just 21 during this documentary, I don't think he can avoid that forever, but I think he might be okay anyway, because like, Ferrero is right that you have to average 2 a year, but if you look at how Djokovic got to 24, he had a late start. He only had one slam at age 23. 2012, 2013, 2014, he only wins one a year. 2016 to 2018, he doesn't win any for a full 2 years. Like, Djokovic achieved that record because he won them in bunches. Like, he won 4 in a row. He had a bunch of seasons where he won 3 in a year. And I don't think the GOAT thing really like fully started for him until that 2018, 2019 run where he won 3 straight, and he was sort of like, okay, like I can keep this pace. So I really don't. I'm probably more of like less of a realist than you guys, but I don't put it past Carlos to do something ridiculous in that respect. I'm not saying I think he will, but I think it's a distinct possibility for him given what he's achieved so far.
Let's revisit this conversation after the channel slam. If he does it again, I might start thinking about it. For now, I mean, one of the next 2 would be already a very good haul for him, I think. And it's good for him that for now he's able to achieve that work-fun balance.
Yeah, and as we come to the end of the show, I just like to say first of all, that like we saw some of the best of Owen today, because here he is like talking about these points as if they were yesterday, like these like describing these points from these matches in such crazy detail. So yeah.
Well, thank you. I hope I didn't talk too much or say too many outlandish opinions. It was a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
No, not at all. I mean, it was perfectly great. I mean, over 70 minutes of content. I don't know if it's our longest episode, but it might be close to that. And you guys might want to know that we basically had zero outline for this. I mean, we basically just sat down and decided to talk about it. But I kind of figured it would go like that. And I think that's one of our best so far. Definitely something that was worth doing for the show. Don't regret watching this. If you guys haven't seen it and if you still listen to the episode, I mean, I don't know if you still have it, like if there's still a point for you to do it. But actually, I think it's best to probably combine this with watching the episodes and just seeing for yourself. It's not too long. I think the entire thing is below 2 hours. Definitely more focused on the personality, as we said many times, than like the actual points analysis of tennis. But that's what apparently they wanted, both Netflix and Carlos.
Yep, and this was a pleasure, because these kind of episodes are so great with a guest, because you can kind of agree, disagree on stuff, and you can cover the whole nature and scope of a particular player. So I really enjoyed it, and Yeah, so we'll be back with more content with episode 58 coming after Rome, and we'll see you guys then. So it's not often that we do 2 episodes in 1 week, but we had to for this. So
Yeah, suddenly we're the most hardworking podcast on the planet, but here we are. Hope you enjoyed this. Well, not too much of a surprise. We hinted at this during the previous episode, but I hope you enjoyed this special, as it says in the title, and because we had Owen for the first time, definitely a special one.
and also recommended to watch this on YouTube, mostly because we're growing our channel, but also you know where to find us on Apple and Spotify already, and yeah, so more YouTube content and more subscribers. It's always good for the show. So with that, I think we're good to go.